Hello, my name is Ryan Morrison, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about the death of Martin Luther King Jr. by Robert F. Kennedy. Right now, I'm going to show you a picture of Robert Kennedy back when he made this speech, which was back in the 1960s. The exact date was April 4th, 1968, when Robert made his speech about Martin Luther King's death. Right there is the picture of the actual picture of Robert Kennedy making his speech. Like I said, Robert Kennedy lived from 1925 to 1968. He was 43 years old. Robert Kennedy was the seventh of 9 children in his family. As a child growing up, Kennedy loved to travel. He was very close with his father, who also traveled with him. They traveled abroad quite a few times, and they had many exciting events, which included meeting President Franklin D. Roosevelt and even meeting the Pope. He shook the Pope's hand and actually met him one-on-one, which is a pretty huge event. Robert was the brother of former President John Kennedy from 1961 to 1963. John and Robert were very close. When John was elected president, he actually made Robert his attorney general, which is a pretty big deal. Robert used the position to help further the cause of civil rights. Him and Martin Luther King Jr. did a lot of work together and to help further the civil rights movement. After his brother was assassinated, John Kennedy, he was elected senator from New York. Many people believed he would have won the Democratic presidential nomination in 1968 if he had not been assassinated. JFK's assassination day occurred April 4th, 1968. Senator Robert F. Kennedy was in Indiana campaigning for the Democratic, it was not Robert Kennedy's assassination day, it was JFK's assassination day. It was April 4th, 1968. Robert Kennedy was in Indiana campaigning for the Democratic nomination for president when he learned of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. He had been shot and killed. Kennedy had to break the news of King's death to a large gathering of African Americans that evening in Indianapolis, Indiana. He had no time to prepare because he had no idea this was going to happen. He kind of had to make the speech on the spot. Just 5 years earlier, Kennedy's brother John had also been shot and killed. Many people believe, like I said, many people nominated that he actually would have won the presidential nomination in 1968 if this event did not occur. If he was not assassinated, that is. The gathering was actually a planned campaign rally for Robert Kennedy and his bid to get the 1968 Democratic nomination for president. He was going to make the speech, the campaign, but he was actually informed right when he stepped foot off the plane and was informed to make the campaign stop due to the fact that part of the city that the campaign was taking place in was considered to be highly dangerous and very ghetto. But Kennedy insisted on proceeding and making the speech. Some of the reasons why this speech is so famous and known today is because of the fact of how well Robert Kennedy made his delivery and how great of an impact it made in such a tough time. When the crowd heard the awful news of Martin Luther King's death, they were undoubtedly filled with anger, great amounts of sorrow. Most of that anger, I'm sure, was directed towards whites. The purpose of the speech was pretty much to persuade the crowd not to react to such a terrible event with hatred and violence, and that's exactly what it had done. If this speech had never been made by Robert, I think the outcome of Martin Luther King's death probably would have been a lot worse. It could have been extremely more violent and a whole lot more of hatred between the people. Segregation, in my opinion, would have been out the roof, a whole lot worse, and I'm sure both white and black individuals would have been killed. You know, the main reason was to inform the people of MLK's death and to encourage the people to continue to be hopeful and compassionate towards the war on segregation. to really try and help influence people that the war is not over due to the fact that MLK was murdered, and the civil rights movement will continue to full extent. In his speech, he stresses the word "we" and uses it many times to get it through everyone's head that the fight will be fought together between whites and blacks. And in this event, they will come together and they will fight through. You can tell Robert really meant the words that were coming out of his mouth by the tone of his voice. It seemed as if he was very concerned, like a mourning type of voice, like a very concerned voice. He opened the speech up with, quote unquote, "I have very sad news for all of you. Could you lower them signs, please? I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world." The effects that he had on the opening paragraph were extremely well. I think the effects were very strong. You can really tell how someone is feeling by the effects of the language they use. Robert uses the word "all" multiple times, which shows that he is trying to mirror the whole purpose of the civil rights movement, like I said earlier, together. Just the way different words were used in the speech really had a huge impact on why the speech was so promising. Kennedy also goes ahead and asks if the signs for his political motivation be put down at the moment. Like I said, quote unquote, lower the signs, which reveals that he is truly more concerned about the tragedy of MLK now than his political campaign. He uses repetitions of strong positive words and strong negative words to compare and contrast situations. Overall, this speech was done extremely well and very important. I actually did not know much about Robert Kennedy before I did the research in the PowerPoint on this, and really had no idea who Robert Kennedy was, nor did I know he was assassinated just like his brother. It's a coincidence that they're both assassinated and they're both very known people in today's world. Robert Kennedy's death, which occurred shortly after midnight on June 1968, Robert Kennedy was shot 3 times by Palestinian immigrant Sirhan after a speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, California. Robert Kennedy died of his wounds 26 hours later in a nearby hospital. The assassination of Robert Kennedy led to Secret Service protection for all future presidential candidates, which we see now. The reason to be believed on why Robert Kennedy was assassinated was because how he opposed war in Vietnam, and he actually aided, or he was for military aid in Israel at the time, and it's said to be his murderer, Sirhan, was in fact from Israel, where he did have family members still attending there, still living there. I'm sorry, and that pretty much concludes my speech. I hope that I informed you guys for the most part. Robert Kennedy's speech about Martin Luther King's death and why Robert Kennedy was assassinated. I thank you for your time. Have a nice night.